제 점벌 조던 힘이 장 존의 모놈 점벌 갑자다 바가로 다른 잔도 셔머도 돈바도 제장라게 샹자 내전로 저기 장감서 저거 두지 샹도 일라만 지메 번조장라 소란데
They unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful dharmas, difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it here to receive it and uphold it, vow to fathom that Buddha's true meaning, to liberate all beings, thus generate the supreme bodhicitta. Now let us continue with our class on the Surangama Sutra. Today is Saturday. We will not have class tomorrow. Monday, maybe we will not. I'm not sure, but we will. I will ask of you to start with the pre-class chanting as usual. If there's no class, we will let you know. It is only a matter of chanting the aspiration of Samadabhadra. But I think we should have class. Most likely we will. On Monday, we will resume our class on the wish-fulfilling treasury. Now, in terms of Surangama Sutra, we are currently in the volume or in the particular part that covers on the 5 skandhas and then the 6 roots, the 12 ayatanas and 18 dhatus. These teachings are very clearly expounded over here. When we were studying the Abhidharma and Gateway to Knowledge, usually these kinds of content are covered as well. However, it does not get into the root of the teaching, which is no phenomena has true existence. Therefore, the Surangama Sutra's analysis is similar to that of the fundamental wisdom of Madhyamika. The fundamental wisdom of Madhyamika also relies on such similar reasoning, and then comes to the result or comes to the conclusion that all phenomena within samsara and nirvana, in fact, it does not have any solid existence. So it is of a great emptiness. Therefore, it is similar to the Surangama Sutra, where the Buddha uses the various methods of analysis to help us to come to the realization that even the awareness is not a production of causes and conditions. It is not a production of spontaneity. It is not a production of mixing and uniting, nor not mixing and uniting. Currently, we finished that part, and we're studying the part of the 5 skandhas. In the last part yesterday, I wasn't so happy with my explanation. It was the part on, moreover, when you see the flowers, your eyes should not be obscured. So why is it that the eyes are said to be pure and bright when they see emptiness? It is to assume that the flowers come from your eyes. When you see the flowers out in space, your eyes should have an obscuration. And then, however, if you were to say that you see the flowers in space, then it is not possible because your eyes shouldn't be obscured. If your eyes do have obscuration, that is not correct. Why is it that the eyes are said to be pure and bright when you see clear emptiness? It is because when your eyes have obscurations, then how could you say that, oh, this is pure sky and this is pure and bright space? You won't be able to state that anymore. when I was giving the teaching on this part, I felt I don't quite understand, or there's some kind of confusion about it. It happens when you're put on the spot in the class. So after the class, I spent some more time contemplating on it, and I was thinking, how come I didn't understand it how come I got a little stuck during the teaching of the class? And then after that, I decided to just repeat it again today. Today, let's look at the form skandha. The form skandha out of the 5 skandhas of feeling, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. Yesterday, we talked about the form skandha, and today we're going to talk about feeling skandha. According to Madhyamika it states that the feeling skandha has the capacity to perceive, to receive. That's the nature of it. The Buddha would first give a brief example at the beginning and then detailedly explain each of them to make analysis of each of them in great detail. The Buddha said that, Ananda, consider the example of a person whose hands and feet are relaxed and at ease, and whose entire body is in balance and harmony. If a person, for example, his hand and feet, they're relaxed and healthy, in balance, harmonious, not only his hands and feet, his whole body is of balance, is without any discomfort. His whole body, his whole mind, mentality, very healthy, without any special feelings. When people are at that state, usually we're not really aware of the life process. So over here, the Buddha said that he's unaware of his life process because there is nothing agreeable or disagreeable in his nature. When we're at that state, everything's comfortable, there's not much of illness, not much of a feeling, particularly somewhere. We don't really feel that we're not really aware of our life process. We're not really sure about our surroundings. We're not just aware. But all of a sudden, if you got some headache or if you have some footache, right away you would focus on that area, or if it gets too cold or too hot. So for this person who's rather quite balanced and the body's in harmony, he's unaware of his life process because there's nothing agreeable or disagreeable in his nature. Agreeable meaning very happy, very joyful, and disagreeable meaning something that is painful, something that creates certain kinds of discomfort. When that person's at this neutral state without agreeable or disagreeable feelings. However, for some unknown reason, the person rubs his 2 hands together in emptiness, and the sensations of roughness, smoothness, cold, and warmth seems to arise from nowhere between his palms. All of a sudden, for some reason, this person started to put his 2 hands together and start to rub those 2 hands together, just as when we would also sometimes rub our hands while rubbing hands. There is a sense of elusive feeling that arises. Usually we first have the touch, and after touch there's a feeling, and then after feeling there is grasping. So usually that's the steps. Out of no reason, he started to rub his hands in the space. How does he feel at that time? He feels a sensation of roughness and smoothness and cold and warm, and maybe other kinds of feelings or characteristics of feelings as well. Whenever we rub hands during summer, we would feel that it gets very hot very quickly. Or whenever you're rubbing your hands, there could be the sensation of warmth, of smoothness. Sometimes when we touch the back of our hands, maybe there's a sense of roughness. But these kinds of feelings, it is the five skandhas. It is the skandha of feeling. You should know that it is the same with the skandha of feeling. Ananda, all this illusory contact does not come from emptiness, nor does it come from the hands. Let it be agreeable or disagreeable, the feeling of heat or feeling of coldness or smoothness or roughness, those are simply illusory false feelings. Well, when you look at this feeling, does it come from emptiness, does it come from space, or does it come from your hands? We feel that either it comes from space or it comes from the hands. Other than that, there could be no other reasons, isn't it? Because before you rub the hands, it was in that state of neutral state without any specific feelings. This is one particular type of feeling. There are other feelings as well, but this is the skandha of feeling. The reason for this, Ananda, is that if it came from emptiness, then since it could make contact with the palms, why wouldn't it make contact with the body? Well, first, the Buddha would make the analysis of if this feeling comes from emptiness, what's the fault that's associated with it? And then the Buddha is going to talk about the fault that's associated. If you come to the conclusion, the feeling comes from the hands. In the Vajrayana teachings, usually there's the question of finding the coming and going of mind. Where does it come from? How does it abide? And where does it go? Where does it extinct? This is a similar way of making observation. However, this one is a bit different because the observation is more subtle. It is still a bit different. The Buddha said that, well, the sensation that you just had, let it be smooth or rough, whatever kind of sensation that is, then those sensations, does that come from emptiness? Does it come from those space? Then, since space is all pervasive, it goes everywhere. For that reason, why does the sensation has to find your palms, but not everywhere else, like your head and feet and your torso? Why not those places? Because emptiness is everywhere. Why does it just run and create a sensation in your palms? From this perspective, the space itself doesn't have an intrinsic entity, intrinsically existent entity. It is not that the space has a mind of its own and then just come directly to your hands to create that sensation. Space is without any obscuration. Without obscuration, is the characteristic of space. So if you were to say that it comes from space, that is not valid. Because if it comes from space, then your body should also feel it. Your other parts of the body should also feel it. If you were to say that it came from the palms, it would be readily felt without waiting for the two palms to be joined. Because the feeling only generated when you rub your hands, isn't it? But if your hands already have that feelings, however, if that is the property, that is the characteristic of your palms, then before rubbing them together, your hands should already have that sensation. The Buddha continued to say that what is more, if it were to come from the palms, then the palms would know when they were joined, when they were separated. The contact would return into the arms, the wrists, the bones, and the marrows, and you also should be aware of the course of its entry. If you were to say that it comes through your palms and feels it, then the palm should know that, oh, this is a moment that is going to be warm. This is a moment that is going to be cold. It should know it. And when it leaves, since it comes through the palms, then when it leaves, it should also be aware of how it leaves the palm and gets into the other parts. Let it be coldness or heat. Any kinds of sensations. At the time of departing from the palms, since your palm is connected to your wrist, to your arms, to your shoulder, and to your torso, and to your muscles, and to your bones and marrows, then all of these coming and going away from the palms, that sensation, you should be aware of that all along. You should be able to feel that sensation already, and how that sensation goes into your arm and goes into your muscles and then disappears into your marrow or stays somewhere. Just like you would feel some kind of moving and transition of that sensation within your body, as if there's an insect within you. You should be able to know its track. Just as during the pandemic, there's the tracking of the movements, the tracking of the traveling history of people who tested positive. So similarly, if the sensation comes from your hand, then you should be able to know where the sensation went into your left or your right hand, and then where it goes after. Therefore, you should know that the skandha of feeling is empty and false, because it neither depends on causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. According to Shantideva, he said that if one were to see the nature as such, then how could there not be extinction of grasping? Because grasping comes from feeling, and feeling comes from touching. So if the feeling itself does not have any true existence, then how could there be generated? How could grasping be generated? According to Avatamsaka, according to Bodhisattva Charyavatara, it says that if touching is not real, then where does feeling come from? If there's no touching, no feeling, then how could there be grasping? Why do people still chasing for all of those delusions?
当时的这个冷也好，就是热也好，乐也好，苦也好，这种感受呢，就是
When we rub the hands together,
其实也并不是
the
来自于
feeling
术
of
的。
coldness,
如果来
of
自于术
warmth,
的
of
话呢，有这个故事。
smooth, of rough,
如果来自
whatever
于
that
虚空
is,
的话呢，就是也有
that
这个故
feeling
事。
does not
那
come
这样
from
的
the
话呢，就是
hands.
它
If
没
it
有
comes
一个
from the
实体
hands,
的这种
then
的
it
来源，
has
没有
the
实体的来源
associated
的话呢，
faults.
那
If
就
it comes
就
from
就像是一
space,
个
it
二次
also
元
has
的，它没有
associated
真土，
faults.
就是不可能
It
有
is
它的
just
真
like
土存
talking
在的。
about the
所以
child
它
of a
通过
barren
这
woman.
种
It
方式
doesn't
来
have
观
any
察的话
place
呢，
to
就
be
是也应
born.
该
It doesn't
知道
have
说
any
我们这
place
个
to
众生的话呢，
abide.
每
And
天都是
through this kind of
就是
analysis,
急
we
急
should
忙
be
忙
able to
啊，就是
understand
来
that
来去
the
去，就是
sentient
追
beings
追逐
rushing
什么
every
呢？
day,
就是追
trying
逐我们
to
的快乐。
search
然
for
后呢，就是避
happiness,
开我们的
trying
这个
to
痛苦。
avoid
但是如果我
suffering.
们没有
But
认
if
识到
we
这
do
个
not
受它自己的
recognize the
本体的
nature
话呢，就是
of
一直
this
是被它
hand
束缚着的，
to
爱
start
是
with,
束缚
will
着
be
的。所
fettered
以
by
居士
it.
论当中也是讲到这
Therefore,
个
according to
像
Abhidharma,
那
it
个
says
出家人
that
的话呢，
for
就是以
the
这个相
monastics,
就是束缚的。然后作为
they
在家
are
人的话呢，
fettered
就是以
by
受啊，就是来这
perception,
个束
and
缚的。
for the
啊，对，其
lay
实是现在
practitioners,
的话
they
呢，就是
are
不管是出
fettered
家还是在
by
家，很多人
feelings.
只要生长在这
But
个
nowadays,
世
let
界
it be
上的话呢，
monastic
就是
or
很
lay
多人都是
practitioners,
被那个受
majority
着
of
困
people
着啊，
are
所以这
fettered
样的呢
by
就非常多的。
feelings.
所以我们这个学习楞严经，
So
就是
when we're studying
就
Surangama
认
Sutra,
识各
we
方面
need
的一
to
些教义的话
recognize
呢，
the
就是
teachings
不管
from
是
the
什么
different
僧人的人
angles
的话呢，
so
就是
that
都也可以
whomsoever
这
you
个
are,
获得解脱
whatever
啊。就是我看
status
到
you are, you
以
can
前
all
有一
attain
个教
liberation.
宗是这个
I
曾
remember
义父
that
啊，就
I
是
read
是
a
个在家人，
story
就是
of
然
a
后在
lay
家人。
practitioner
那么他的话呢，
and
就是
how
他
this lay
就
practitioner
就
attained
也是
liberation.
这个从
His
小
name
都
is
是对
Zheng
这个
Yifu,
佛有
and
特别
when he
虔
was
诚的
young,
信
he
仰。
had lots
后
of
来呢，
faith towards
就是
Buddha
去
Dharma.
那
And then
个听
later,
说是那个佛印禅师的
he
话呢，就
heard
是
that
他那个
Master
就是
Fu Yin passed
就笑着啊，这个实
away,
现圆寂
passed
的。
into
他后来就是自己
nirvana
呢，就是也觉得是就
in
这
a
样是非常
smile.
有
And
意
then
义
he
的。
thought to
然后
himself,
到处去这个
this would
求
be
学
really
啊，就是
meaningful.
参访啊。后来
Being
呢，就是
inspired
在
by
我们
that,
的
he
禅师
started
那里
to
就是听到
search
这个
for the Dharma
楞严经，
teachings
就是
and
听到楞
traveled
严经。
around to find
然后他
teachers.
听到楞
And
严
then
经以
he
后呢，就是
studied
他也
the
是学了
Surangama
度了一段
Sutra
时间。
from
这样
a
以后
Zen
的话呢，
teacher.
就是后来
After
应该
that,
这个
he
开悟的。
studied and
开悟以
read
后
for
呢，
a
就是
period of
哪怕
time
这个
and
离开的时
attained
候呢，就是生
realization.
死之
At the
名
time
啊，
of death,
什
he
么
said
挚爱，
that
就是意思是说是生死的这个道理呢，就是
the
我就非
meaning
常
of
明白。
life
说
and
完以
death,
后呢，就是
I've
他就
already
沐
got
浴啊，
it.
更衣啊，然后呢，就是这个
After
身体
he
就是就
after
是
he
密
said
化，
that,
就是他就站着啊，
he
这个实
went to
现
take
圆
a
寂的。
bath
所
and
以
change his
他列了
clothes,
一些
and
这
then
个
he
不单
passed
是高
into
僧大德，就是出家人当中的话呢，
nirvana
有些
in
是确
the
实是通
standing
过学楞
position.
严经而
Not just
实现
him,
圆寂的
many
时候
great
呢，就
masters
是
of
出
the
现
past,
众
they
相，就已经就是
attained
有这个开
liberation
悟
or
了。
attained
而且我
the
们这个
signs of
在家人的
realization
话呢，
through
就是也有
study and
很多的
chanting
这
the
个正
Surangama
式的
Sutra.
供养呢，
There are lots
就
of
是
the
通过这个
examples
楞严
like
经呢，
such.
到最后就是
There are
真的
many
是
people
已
who
经就是
attained
这个获得这个
realization
生死
through
自
the
在吧
practice and
啊，就
study
是
of
生死
Surangama
之
Sutra.
名我之
At the
我
end,
之之
they
意
would be
啊，
able
就
to
完全就是
attain
这样。
freedom
所以
from
生
birth
死
and
的道
death.
理的话呢，就完全就是
Just
明
as
白，
Dung
就是
said,
就
the
非常这
meaning
个
of
自
birth
由
and
啊，就
death,
是也
I
就是
have already
生和死
understood
的
it
话呢，
now.
对他来讲呢，何时就是像你看到
If
是就
one
是
were
特
to
别就是
understand
应
the
有自如啊，就应
meaning,
有自如。
the
所以
truth
说，
of
我
birth
想
and
我们
death,
这个
then
受
one
啊，
would
这个受的
attain
话
the
呢，其
supreme,
实我们这个
the
众生
most
是很
profound
可怜的，就
freedom.
是为了就是
At
快乐
that
的这
time
种
of
感受
attaining
啊，就
true
是一直呢，就
understanding
是
of
就奔
birth and
波，
death,
然
then
后为了
that
就是
person is completely
就是灭除这
liberated
种痛苦的
and
话呢，就是
completely
也是
free.
一种
So I
一直这
think
个
whenever
奔
we
波啊，
hold
就是
on
如
to
果我
this
们不知心
feeling,
的奥
the
秘的话
sentient
呢，就
beings
是
would be
那
of
么
the
就
most
是处
pitiful
了逼
because
迫的
we
话
would
呢，
be
就是也
keep
是枉然的。这个
running
大家也是
to
非常
grasp
清楚的。
happiness
所以
and running away to get rid of suffering. That is only because we don't know the profound secret of the mind. But to search for happiness and running away from suffering really doesn't do anything, as everyone is aware of. It is meaningless. Therefore, it is quite important for us to study teachings like Surangama Sutra. When I was looking into the commentary of Madhyamika Avatara composed by Khenpo Deba, he said that practitioners studying the 5 treatises, the Buddhist logic and the precepts and clear realization and Abhidharma, those are really important. However, if you don't understand the prajna paramita, the emptiness, then all the other studies are not necessarily beneficial, they're not as important. So the Madhyamika study is just like the king of all mountains, the Mount Sumeru. It is just like the sun and the moon that lit the space. The philosophy of Madhyamika is the essence of Buddhist philosophy. So everyone should understand the root of Surangama Sutra is with a logical analysis from the Sutrayana's point of view to come to the understanding and the conclusion that all phenomena is of emptiness. So now we've already finished talking about the emptiness of the feeling skandha. The next one is on the skandha of perception. In terms of perception, what is perception? According to Madhyamika Avatara, it says that perception is accepting and rejecting. It is when we grasp onto something with our consciousness, such as differentiating this is white, that is red. Holding on to, oh, this is my happiness and that is my suffering. It is to grasp onto certain dharma as a thing that exists with property, with a characteristic, and that is perception. To further demonstrate the skandha of perception, the Buddha continued to tell Ananda by saying that Ananda considered the example of a person whose mouth waters at the mention of sour plums. Here, the Buddha gives an example of a person who hears other people discussing about sour plums. It is a very tardy, sour, tangy fruit. Many of you probably are quite aware of it. It's both sour and sweet. You can try that too after studying Surangama Sutra and see if it's a good fruit. At the time of other people talking about this sour plum, then right away, by this reflective behavioral action, we will have a sense of feeling, a certain feelings. While listening to other people talking about this sour plum, especially when we're very thirsty, right away we would want to eat it, or there's saliva that's going to start to water our mouth. For the same reason, when other people talking about walking on the edge of a high cliff, at the sole of your feet, you would also feel a sense of a tingle, as if you're quite scared, quite fear of that high cliff. When I was around 20 years of age, I went to this monastery around Burkham County. At that time, whenever we had to travel, we have to ride horses. While riding and crossing this road around the cliff, just right on the edge of cliff, actually, it is very narrow. And then on the side of it, since it's a straight cliff, you would be able to see the river right underneath. The locals, of course, they're not afraid anymore. They're very accustomed to it. But when we ride the horses, we can hear the sound of the click-and-clack sound of the shoe of the horse. At that time, I feel really terrified, especially when I listen to that sound. I feel like the people riding on the horse and the horses would fall under the high cliff. Even nowadays, when I think of it, I still get a little terrified. Or whenever people walk on a place place that is of quite high, quite in space, and it's really high, but it's made of glasses, lots of people would also get very scared. So the two examples, one is listening to the discussion of sour plum, and the other one is thinking about walking on the edge of a high cliff. By hearing those two examples, people tend to get very vivid feelings. There was another real story, real historical story in mainland China back in the time of the Three Kingdoms. There was a very famous emperor at that time. His name is Cao Cao, and that time he was leading 10,000 soldiers marching to fight another group of soldiers, and then they traveled a long time. For a long time, at that time they were without food or drink, and the people couldn't walk anymore. The soldiers couldn't walk anymore. And then Cao Cao made up the story by saying that let's walk faster, because not far away there is a forest of plums, of sour plums. And then by hearing that, naturally all the soldiers started to have water in their mouth, and naturally their thirst is quenched. In fact, when we talk about the thinking, the perception is exactly the same. The perception of thinking, by the time of hearing the sound of the sour plum, and then the water, the mouth water, in fact, it is also without coming, without going. It simply is just a thinking about that sour. And then the Buddha continued to say that, Ananda, you should know that the watering of the mouth caused by mention of the plum does not come from the plum, nor does it come from the mouth. So this kind of mouth water, what's the source of it? Does it come from the sour plum, or does it come from your mouth? That's the only two possibilities, isn't that? Other than that, it's just the sound. The sound doesn't have any function in it either. The reason for this, Ananda, is that if it were produced from the plums should speak for themselves. Why wait for someone to mention them? This mouth-watering, this capacity of the plum that can produce mouth-watering, if it really produced from the plum, then the plum should just discuss, or should just speak for themselves. The plums can just speak for themselves, and it should not be necessary for a person to speak of them. But the plum do not speak for themselves, and one must still wait for a person to speak of the plum for someone's mouth to water. Why someone else is talking about it? Why others should talk about it? What's the connection between the plum and other people discussing about it? If it came from the mouth itself should hear. And what need would there be to wait for the ear? If the ear alone heard, then why doesn't the water come out of the ear? If it is the mouth that hears the sound and then started to water itself, that's more reasonable. But it is not that the mouth hears. It is rather the ear that hears the sound of sour plum. Therefore, the ear is completely, we know that the ear is completely separated from the mouth. Then the root of the ear hears the sound, but why is the mouth, the water comes out from the mouth? If you were to say that it is not the mouth that hears the sound, rather it is the ear hears it, then why this mouth water doesn't come out from your ear? Why does it come out from your mouth? whenever we make those observations, if we were to directly refute it, it would be difficult, but this is exactly how to make this observation and how to observe the causes and conditions. In the conventional truth, when these kinds of detailed conditions are not discussed and not observed, then we feel that, oh, as long as the causes and conditions are matured, then it should be able to happen. But these causal and conditions, in fact, they're empty. There is no intrinsic existence, where Ananda kept on thinking there is an intrinsically existent thing. Now let's go to the next example about someone thinking about stepping on the edge of a cliff, which is very similar to the previous one. And then the Buddha said, thinking about walking along the edge of the cliff is exactly the same thing. According to Master Chang Shui, in his commentary, he said that if we were to make this kind of observation, when we think that we're walking along the edge of a cliff, does this fear generated from the bottom of the foot, does it come from the sole of the foot? Or does it come from the cliff? How could, if it is from the cliff, then the cliff is related to itself. If it is not from the cliff, then you were saying that it is from the sole of the feet. Does the feet feel fear of a cliff at the time of hearing it's a cliff? So it is not like that at all. It is when the mind grasps onto it, or people saying it, and start to, if one were to start to have the perception or start to think about it, then there are the different feelings. And then the Buddha said that, therefore, you should know that the skandha of thinking is empty and false, since it neither depends upon cause and condition for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Just as it is stated in the Lankavatara Sutra, it says that the various things arise from the arising of mind, and the various things would extinct with the extinct of mind. The sentient beings have all kinds of delusional, dualistic thoughts. Seeing there is nothing, seeing things out of nothing. In our world, that is exactly how the worldly beings would grasp. Let it be grasping onto people, grasping onto some kind of characteristic, or thinking about candy, thinking about good food, chocolate, or music. Whenever there are some things that seems to be beautiful, that seems to be gentle, that seems to be something that can be graspable. In fact, they are relied on two things, especially if we look at the nature of those two things. Then we would be able to know that the skandha of thinking or skandha of perception is indeed not attainable. Now we've already finished the third skandha. Now let us look at the fourth skandha, which is the skandha of activity. The skandha of action, skandha of activity, according to Chandrakirti, he said that it is mainly to maneuver, which is a little bit difficult to understand as well. According to the commentary on the Abhidharma, it says that anything that is other than the four skandhas, then that is the skandha of action. according to the gateway to knowledge, it says that there are two aspects. One is correlated to mind, such as the 51 mental factors. Those are part of the skandha of actions. And then the other one that is not correlated, which are the 14 aspects, such as attaining, not attaining, and clarity, and so on. According to the Mahayana Dharma, there are 10 more. So altogether, there are 24. That is on top of the not correlated actions with that is stated in the Abhidharma. So therefore, there are 24. But in general, when we talk about this, it is really a process. For example, the process of attaining, that is also a type of dharma. Because it is not sentient, it is not part of the animated, it is not part of the inanimate either. Therefore, as a conditioned dharma, it is stated in such a way that other than the other four skandhas, it is the skandha of action. We can say that this action, skandha action, is a process or a stage. Now let's look at the Buddha's brief explanation. The Buddha said that Ananda, consider, for example, swift rapids. Those waves follow up on one another in orderly succession, the ones behind never overtaking the ones in front. So there's a for example, there is some very rapid water.
那这个瀑流的它的这个浪花，就是它的这个波浪的话呢，它是这个相续不断的。
The waves that comes in the rapid water, it is one after another in succession. And it is in orderly succession. It is not that the later wave would be able to jump over the front one and then it comes first. It is not like that at all. It has its natural waves. It doesn't really disturb the orders of the front and then the back and then the one after. There is no way for it to surpass the other ones. Whenever we go to a place, whenever we see those rapid waves, those rapid water, it follows their orders, isn't it? It is not like whenever we drive, people who maybe are in a hurry, they would keep on passing the other cars. It is not like that at all. The water's waves actually has an order and it follows it. You should know that it is the same with the skandha of activity, the Buddha says.
那下面呢就分析啊，就刚才前面好像看起来的是这个是
In the previous ones, it seems that okay, so the skandha of action is this order, is this orderly movement, or it follows certain order. In the brief explanation, we can see that the presentation is very conventional. Let's look at the further analysis of the Buddha. Previously, throughout the examples of the other skandhas, when the Buddha gives an example, we naturally think, yes, that is so. That is how we usually think about it. But after the analysis, we started to have more profound or more analysis in depth. So the Buddha over here says that Ananda, thus the nature of the flow, does not arise because of emptiness, nor does it come into existence because of the water. It is not the nature of water, and yet that it is not separate from either emptiness or water. The Buddha now analyzed the emptiness of skandha of emptiness from 4 aspects. So first one, it is not from emptiness, it is not from water, it is not separated from either emptiness or separated from water. After these 4 analyses, we will be able to understand that this rapids, in fact, they're just simply empty. There's no existence of it. The reason for this ananda is that if it arose because of emptiness, then the inexhaustible emptiness throughout the 10 directions would become an inexhaustible flow, and all the worlds would inevitably be drowned. Whenever you look at these rapids, since it is a part in the space, then whenever we look at the water and the rapids and waves, is it related to emptiness? So, could it be born or arise from emptiness? But that is not true. Because if you were to say that it is part of space, then the space is all pervasive of the 10 directions. In that sense, then the water waves becomes a part of space that could drown the whole world. So the sky, the ground, and the water, there's no way for any of those to exist because everything would be drowned. Our world would be completely drowned. The mountains and rivers and the grounds, then that would be the end of humanity, isn't it? Everything would be drowned by the water. That is definitely not true. So we cannot say that the water comes from space. Some of the ways of logic is this logical analysis is quite interesting. The angle is really interesting when you're studying debates or whenever you study the courses through your post-class mentoring sessions. I think many of you would be able to get much smarter by studying Surangama Sutra. By familiarize ourselves with it, it would definitely help us to get smarter. For example, when I read the old Chinese, the ancient Chinese scriptures, it would be very difficult. It was really difficult for me, but maybe because recently my Chinese got a bit better, and maybe because I'm more familiar with, maybe because I familiarized myself more with the ancient scriptures of, for example, Vimalakirti Sutra and the Lotus Sutra. The more I read it, the more I familiarize myself with it, it got a bit better. But I had a very poor foundation being a herder when I was young and went to school rather quite late. So for those of you who are quite familiar with the Chinese language, it would be easier for you to understand. But the teaching here is quite profound. If you were to follow the logic over here, you can understand, and you can see how if the water were to be born from space, then the whole world of the 10 directions would be drowned. Of course, you don't have to use this particular angle to make your debate, to make your refutation. You can find a different angle. Now, let's look at the second aspect. If the swift rapids existed because of water, then their nature would differ from that of water, and location and characteristics of its existence would be apparent. Previously, we talked about, if it is generated from the space, then the space would, since the space characteristic is all pervasive in 10 directions, then the water will be able to drown it. And then now he said that the rapids nature is not water. Why shouldn't it be from the water? Because if it is arisen from the water, then the water is cause and the rapids is the fruition. In this way, there's a mistake of saying that the cause and fruition are of not one entity. According to the commentary of Fingers and Palm, it says that water is just like the Father, and then the rapids are just like the Son. In this way, if the cause is water, then the rapids shouldn't have the nature of water anymore. Since they are two different entities, they should be two different separate entities. This part is a bit different, so you need to spend some time to look into it, because the reasoning logic is a bit different than the previous one. And then over here it says that the location and characteristic of its existence would be apparent.
那么就是优是指的是这个怎么讲就是一个是这个釉就是釉香釉和这个所有就是釉是这个冷釉就指的是水，就是所有的话那就是指的是这个普牛就是也就是说
This simply points to the water and rapids.
那么就是应该是这个一位一体的方式来存在，就这是我们现量见到的。
exist as one entity because that's our direct perception.
如果这个普牛的本体是它是水产生的话，那不应该就如果水产生的话，
If you were to say that the rapids derived from water, it is not correct, because you were to say that the Son and Father are not of one entity. In this way, the rapids should become non-water. But in our direct perception, in fact, the water and the rapids are inseparable. So the location and the characteristic, it probably points to the subject and the object, which is the water and the waves. In the Tibetan translation, it is a little bit different in its angle, but the majority of the commentary, this is how it is explained. This is the second way of making observation. Now, the next observation is that if you were to say that, or can you say that the rapids is just water? Is that, how can you refute that? Well, to refute that, if you were to say that if their nature were simply that of water, then they became still and clear. They would no longer be made up of water.
当你睡这个安静的时候就是它就没有这样的扭唱，就是它就变成一个就是静止的时候，那个时候的话，那就是应该就是不是水的本性。
It is to say that, well, at the time when the water is very still, there is no rapids. Then the water is no longer water, because you identified that the water has the nature of rapids, and the rapids' nature is water. Then at the time when the water is still, then the water just becomes non-water, because, well, the nature of water is rapids, isn't it? It's exactly the same way how we study the Buddhist logic. This is the third aspect. The fourth aspect is that suppose it were to separate from emptiness and water, there isn't anything outside of emptiness, and outside of water, there isn't any flow. If you were to say that it parts from water and parts from emptiness, or apart from space, so how can you separate it? Because there is nowhere that the space cannot extend. How can you find a place where there is no space? Because all phenomena exist in space.
然后这个水外物流就是除了这个水以外就是一个普流
Outside of water, there isn't any flow. Out of water, how can you have any flow? How can you have any rapids and waves?
你看，就是刚才说这个空中产生也不行，水中产生也不行。
So now it can't be part of, it can't be derived from space, can't be derived from water, can't be derived not from space or not from water. Then you may be questioning, then what is it? Well, that is the unfathomable causes and conditions. And as long as those causes and conditions are met, then the fruition, then there would be a fruition. It doesn't have any reasons behind it. It is simply the nature of it. It is simply how things are. It just naturally comes to fruition, just as the seeds and fruition. It is without touch or without non-touch. As long as the causes and conditions are met, they're matured, then the fruition would naturally appear. It is simply manifested without its self-nature. Whenever you make detailed observation, nothing would be able to stand those detailed observation. In this way, everything within our knowledge, within our knowing, there is none that can have any intrinsic existence at all. Therefore, you should know that the skandhas of activity is empty and false, since it neither depends upon cause and condition for existence nor is spontaneous in nature. Previously, we've already covered the four examples. Every time you think of the form, you would be able to think of the flowers in space, and then when you think of the emptiness of feelings, then you can think of the hands rubbing, and then when you think of the skandha of thinking being empty, then you can think of the sour plum. When you think of the skandha of activity, that it is the waves. Those are very applicable to us. They're just things that we can observe everywhere. They're very practical. Whenever we look at the flowers, whenever we look into the space, we can see those kinds of phenomena of flowers or images. And whenever we rub our hands, whenever we observe all the phenomena in our life, we should be able to contemplate upon it. Of course, that is for practitioners. For people who are not interested in practice, then they don't really want to engage in any of those observations in their life, nor to think of it, to use the sutra teachings in their life at all. Just as a great herbal doctor, they would look at every grass and every plantation to think about what illness it could cure or what other illness it could cure. Their sole purpose is to cure the others by using those medicine. So in terms of practice, this is exactly what we need to do as well. In the sutra, then, the Buddha said that Ananda, consider, for example, a man who picks up a Kalavinka pitcher and stops up its two holes. He lifts up the pitcher filled with emptiness. Now we're talking about the fifth skandha, the skandha of consciousness, which is also just like space. Using this example to demonstrate that consciousness, the consciousness, for example, to the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and the consciousness of body, in fact, they are just like space. Kalavinka is a bird that has one body and two heads, according to the Amitabha Sutra. There is a pitcher that looks just like the Kalavinka because it has two. two heads and one body.
这样的这个拼接拼的话呢，那这个拼接拼的这个扣呢，就上面的是有2个这个扣的，就是这2个扣
The
呢，
top
就是把它
of
塞住，
the
就是塞住。
Kalavinka picture has
里
been
面的是装的
stopped,
什么呢？就是全部都是这个
blocked.
虚空啊，就是
But
这个
inside the
虚空
Kalavinka
我们的这个
picture,
瓶子
what
的
is
话呢
there?
相当于是
It
身
is
体的
only
这个
filled
标
with
志
emptiness.
然后里面的空呢，
The
就是意
picture
识的一个这个
over
意
here
思吧，就是
shows
这样
it
的。
is simply
它这个瓶子
the
里面呢，
body.
就是
It
装了
points
这个虚
to the
空，
body that
然后
we
呢，
have, and
就是
then
把这个瓶
consciousness
子
is
的
the
这个盖
emptiness
子呢，就是已
within.
经塞住了，
After
已
this
经盖好了。
person blocks
然后以后
the
呢，
two
就是
heads
千
of
里
the
面行
Kalavinka picture,
向踏
he then
步，然后
traveled
呢
a long
就开始呢，就是里面装了
distance
这个虚空
to
以后呢，就这个路过这个千里啊，就是很远的地方。
present
然后
this
把这个虚
Kalavinka
空呢，就
picture
是
that
送给
has
就是他给你奉献
emptiness or
就是
space within
赠
it
送
to
给
another
就是另外
country
一个这个其他的这个国家啊，就其他的一个
as a
国
gift.
家，就是这样的话呢，我们觉得是好像这种感觉啊，就是在一个瓶子里面慢慢的装个这个虚
Now
空，
let's think
然后呢
about it
就
in
是
a
就路上就
vase,
是
in a
很远的
picture.
地方，然后送到这个
Within
别的这
it
个国家
is
去的
just
话呢，就
space,
是这个不知道
and then
是在
traveled
享
far
受什么，
away,
就是可能
and
有这种
then
感
send
觉。
it to
而
a
且是装虚
country,
空的话呢，
to a
其实
different
装虚空
country,
我
and
们
present
好多人
this
觉
as a
得，因为
gift.
这个现在
Whenever we
课本
think
的
of
教材的一些
space
这个原因
or
吧，就是我
emptiness,
们虚空的
sometimes
话呢，有时候是
we
经常去试
think
验呐，
of
就是化学试验呐，这样的话呢，就是要么是那个就是瓶子里面就是有的这种
chemistry
氧气，
experiments
或
that
者
we
说
had
是
when we
二
were
氧
still
化
in
碳，就是
school.
把
We
这个
think
是
that,
当
oh,
做
there is some
空，
oxygen
就是虚
or
空。其实
carbon
它不是
dioxide
虚空，
within,
它只
and
不
we
过是
would take
我们
those
没有
as
就是看到
space,
的东
as
西，就是其
emptiness.
实里面是
But
它有
there
一
are
种这
simply
个就是
things
物
that
质，
we
就
can't
是有一
see.
种物质。所有的虚
However,
空呢，就
let
是
it
除
be
了氧气
oxygen
也好，
or
二氧化碳，
carbon
所有的这些
dioxide,
这个
they
尘
are
啊，就是没
still
有，
some kind of
然后就完全的
material,
这种
except
空
we
呢，
can't
就是
see
就
it.
称之为是这个虚空的。那
But
这样的话，你
what
瓶子里面装虚空
we
和不
refer
装虚
as
空的话呢，
space
实际上是
is
没有什么
that
这
there
个
is
差别的。
nothing in there,
其实
that
这个
it's
时运的话
simply
呢，
just a
也是这样，
container
就是
of
这个时运
all
呢，就是
phenomena.
当知亦复如是。下面是这个怎么分析呢？就是佛告
And
诉
then the
阿
Buddha
难，
said that you
如
should
是
know
虚
that the
空，
skanda of consciousness is the
非
same
放
way.
非必放
The
来，
space does
非
not come
次
from
放
one
入。
place, nor does it go to
他说
another.
刚才那个不是虚空，就是装在，比如说我们从这个拉萨呢，就是装一
Okay,
瓶
to
这个
give
虚
you
空，然
another
后呢
more
就是来
specific
到这个拉荣，
example,
就是来到拉荣的话呢，
someone
就是
traveled
那么
all
就
the
是
way
它
from
是这个
Lhasa to
肺，就是实
Larongar
际上是并不是
by
从这个拉萨
carrying
就是
one
装虚
bag
空来
of
的，也
while
不是的
carrying
话
one
呢，
bag
就
of
是从这
space.
个这个拉荣呢，就是把这个虚空呢，就是又加入在这个刚才瓶子里面，就是它就
In
刚开
fact,
始的
this
这个意思
space
是应该这样的，
is
就是
not
从
something
从那
that
个地方呢，就是不
this
是从那个地
person
方来的，
put
也并不是
into
呢，就
the
是从
bag
这个地
in
方呢
Lhasa,
入于虚空
nor
啊，就是从那
Larongar,
个地
nor
方带来，不
did
是
he
从那个
put
地方
the
带来，
space
也不是
into
从
the
这个
bag
地方呢，就
in
是把虚空已
in
经
Larongar.
又再次装入去的，不是这样的，就是这样。那下面就是分析的时候呢，如是阿难，若彼放
It is
来
not that
则
from one place
本
this
品
person put in the
中
space, and
即
from the
住
other the
去
place has
空
been
取
brought back in. It is
于
not
本
like that
品
at all.
地因少
To
虚
further
空
explain that,
如果
the
是
Buddha
这
said that
个
the
从
reason
这
for
个拉
this
萨
Ananda
从
is
这
that
个
if
就
it
是
were
抓了
to
一
come
瓶这个
from
虚空
another
拿来的
place,
话呢，
then
那么就是
when
在这个冰
when the
就是
stored
这个
up
从拉萨
emptiness
那边的
in
话
the
呢，就是
pitcher
把这个虚
went
空这个
elsewhere,
虚空
there
当中
would
呢，
be
就是
less
拉了
emptiness
一
in the
瓶子，
place
然后
where
呢
the
就是
pitcher
贮存
was
在这个瓶
originally.
子当中啊，就贮存在这个我们的这个瓶子里面的这个虚空当中。那这
So
样一
if
来
we
的话呢，就
take
是
one
于
piece of
地
space
本
from
地
Lhasa,
就是那么原来有的那个瓶子的这种本地的这个虚空呢，就是应该少了一部分
then
啊，就少了什么呢？原来
the
是这个拉萨有
space
这个
in
1个
Lhasa
亿的
would
那个就是
be
这个
one bag
就是
less
这个
or
瓶子
one
的虚
pitcher
空的话
less.
呢，那么我们就是拉了
For
一瓶的话
example,
呢，就是
if
现
there
在就
were
是
1
那就是没
billion
有没
of
有1个亿了，应该
space
是这
worth
个9990
vase worth of space in Lhasa, if we were to take one vase away, then it is no longer a billion
就
anymore,
这样的，
right?
就所以他们那边的
Because
话呢
there is one
应该
less.
这个虚空就是减少了一品，但实
But
际上
that
呢
is not
就是
possible.
有没有这个概念？不可能的吧？就是拉萨的这个虚空，我虽
The
然一个
space
大瓶
of
子的这个虚
Lhasa,
空
though
了
that I
现
carried an empty bottle from Lhasa, then Lhasa doesn't have that bottle anymore. But of course, there are people who would sell the air of the Himalayas or the air of Japan and Australia. So all kinds of oxygen and the other kinds of whatever other kinds of air, they would put it in the bottle and they would say that, oh, this is the water, this is the air, this is the space that's from so-and-so place, this is so good for the health, this is so good to balance your body. And some said that this is the water from so-and-so thousands of years ago, so you should buy it for so-and-so amount of money. And people nowadays tend to be very gullible too. Well, if there's a person were to say that, oh, this is a space from Lhasa, or this is a space from the peak of Himalayas, so you should sell it. This is $30,000 per bottle. You should buy it. Would that be possible? I'm not sure if there are people actually doing it. But to think that the space would be one less if you carry one bottle of space to somewhere else, that concept sounds really strange, isn't it? If it were to enter this region, when the holes were unplugged and the pitcher was turned over, one would see emptiness come out. This part, I think the explanation by Master Chang Shui is easier to understand. He said that if you were to say that this space entered from our space, that is not appropriate either. Why so? It is because when you unplug the bottle and then pour the space from this pitcher, if there is a solid entity of space, then we should be able to see it. And then once it's being poured out, we will have the opportunity to put the space of this region back in. According to the commentary, it says that if the space of this area can enter into the vase, then you have to pour out the space from the other region. Just like when we look at the trains, one group of people had to get down from a certain stop, and then the other group of people would be able to get into the train or the bus, so that there will be enough space for different groups of people to get on and get off the trains. By making observation of that, the consciousness, the skandha of consciousness is not solidly existent either. When we apply this example into the practical aspect, it is to say that from this lifetime, I think I have this consciousness, and then to my next lifetime, it is just like traveling to the other place with the consciousness, or traveling to the other place with the emptiness. Then you're simply carrying this consciousness to the other place. That is not correct either. So this Buddha nature, alaya, those kinds of teachings, we can later discuss it more. And then the Buddha said that therefore you should know that the skandha of consciousness is empty and false, since it neither depends upon causes and conditions for existence, nor is spontaneous in nature. Now we've already covered on the five skandhas teaching. The five skandhas are not truly existent. But of course, we need to consider during the first turning of the Dharma wheel, the Buddha did say that the five skandhas are existent. And then during the second turning, he said that by seeing it, the five skandhas are being empty. And then the third turning, and in the Vajrayana teaching, he taught that the nature of the five skandhas are just the five Buddhas. According to the Surangama Sutra, it says that the form is just like a collection of foam, and suffering or pain is just like bubbles. The thinking is just like a wild horse. The actions just like a banana tree. The consciousness is no other than illusion. According to Anshigao's translation, there's a shorter version of saying that. And in our studies, when we studied Madhyamika, it talks about how the five skandhas are simply empty. When we studied Vajrayana teaching, just like the Great Illusory Net, it also talks about the Vajraskandha's nature are the five Buddhas. When we study the Tantrayana teachings, our way of understanding it is no longer through this perspective. It is to directly see that the five skandhas indeed are the five Buddhas. But of course, it's quite important for us to understand it stage by stage, layer by layer. Now we've concluded the second volume. Usually the first and the second volume are the most difficult to finish. Now we've completed. Later it will be very smooth and successful.